Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Sex. He's a man. We wrestled.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, my weird dad's weird podcast about weird movies.
Hello, and welcome to Patreon episode number 3 of Wake Up Heavy, Recollections of Horror. And this time I'm going to be jabberjawing about one of my favorite films, one of the handful of films that I had on Laserdisc back in the early 90s that actually kind of brought me to this movie, and happenstance as well, because it ended up popping up on Hulu, streaming for the first time in, I think, a couple of years. I know when we first got Netflix, it was on there, and it was a real crappy standard definition version. This was kind of back when most of the stuff they put out streaming wasn't necessarily HD, and I remember starting it and being really ticked off at the quality and stopping it. Why I don't have it on Blu-ray or DVD, I don't know, since it is one of my favorite movies. And have I even mentioned the title yet? I'm getting to that. But I did have this on Laserdisc, and I was kind of reminiscing about my Laserdiscs when I brought that up in the Taxi Driver episode, having that a Criterion Collection Laserdisc way back when. That was all around 1992, 93, 94-ish when I had that player. This movie, Taxi Driver, I think I had Raging Bull, another Criterion edition. Someone had gifted me Thelma and Louise for some strange reason, which I watched a number of times. And I had River's Edge and Blue Velvet, and that might have been it. I mean, they weren't cheap. And I always remember thinking, God, I wish these were the same size as CDs. You know, and of course, not too many years later, that eventuality happened. But today I'm going to be talking about the 1991 movie from Joel and Ethan Coen, Barton Fink.
We're not going to tackle the world the first time out. The important thing is we all wanted to have that Barton Fink feeling. And I guess we all have that Barton Fink feeling. But since you're Barton Fink, I'm assuming you have it in spades.
Again, one of my absolute favorite films, although I had not watched it in quite some time. That whole slew of Laserdiscs got overplayed. I would kind of realize after a while, okay, I've had enough of this. It gets a little stressful, not as bad as, what did I just watch? Mother. That movie really stressed me out as far as all the intrusion on the house, Mother and him's house, and all the people that are constantly barging in and taking over and acting like assholes just drove me absolutely bonkers. And this isn't the same scenario, but there's a little bit of stressful stuff in here that kind of put me off at a certain point. So, okay, so Barton Fink is the 4th film from the Coen Brothers. Let me go over that in my head. Blood Simple, Raising Arizona, Miller's Crossing, and Barton Fink. And it's absolutely one of my favorites of theirs still. And I think that it was one of the movies from them that didn't take multiple viewings for me to get into. Raising Arizona, I loved immediately, and that was a discovery. I mean, I think it did fairly well at the box office. I didn't see it until it was out either on cable or we rented it. And I was kind of like, well, shit, man, why didn't I go see this in the theater? I don't know if the commercials didn't do it justice or what, but that screwball, madcap, down-home, charming comedy was sort of a breath of fresh air at that time. I just fell in love with that movie and watched it over and over and over again. Miller's Crossing came out, and again, didn't go see it in the theater, saw it on video, and I liked it, but I had a really hard time with the movie. I got lost. I sort of got confused, got a little bit bored because of that confusion, and I would say it took me 3 times to really understand what was going on, and the reason for that is, I think partly because of my trouble with names, which I've mentioned in the past, kind of a nominal aphasia that I have, or that I've invented for myself. But in that movie, they talk about characters that aren't present, and a lot of times when that character is present, they don't necessarily refer to them by name. So for the longest time, I didn't even know that Steve Buscemi was Mink, and I would get confused as to who Rug Daniels was and some of the other kind of minor characters that played important parts in the movie. I was like, who the fuck are they talking about? I had not the same problem, but I had a problem when I saw Fargo for the first time, getting over the accents. I had never heard that accent before, and so overwhelmingly, what's the word I'm struggling for? Just, everybody talks that way, even the Japanese guy. And I'm like, this cannot be real. No one talks like this. It's an exaggeration, but if you've seen documentaries or just, that is that regional accent. And it threw me off. And again, took a number of times for me to see Fargo to really kind of, let that part of it wash away and really get into the story and the acting and everything else. Blood Simple, when I first saw that, I enjoyed it. I mean, it was obviously a low-budget affair, but I think that part of my attraction to that was it had been mentioned in I think it was called Incredibly Strange Films. It was a series from the UK, and they did an episode on Sam Raimi, and this was, I think, at the time that I think Darkman was out. So, we'd had the Evil Dead movies and Darkman, and I can't remember what else they talked about, but, he has a connection with the Coen Brothers. They edited Evil Dead, if I'm not mistaken, and worked on some other stuff. And then they made a movie together called Crime Wave, which was just a total flop and had been reworked by the studio and given all this weird cartoon sound effects. And, I mean, it was shot like a cartoon. But yeah, it was just and I remember seeing it finally at some point, probably after seeing Barton Fink and all these other things, and thinking, yeah, wow, these great filmmakers whose movies I had really come to enjoy just made this utter disaster. But anyway, kind of beating around the bush here, because this is a Patreon episode and I'm talking to one guy and I have that in my head the whole time, and he'll know all of what I'm talking about here. We could have just discussed all this over coffee last week, but, But Barton Fink, I absolutely loved right off the bat. And this is part of my life, my movie life, that I have very fond memories of. I mentioned in an episode that where I live is not a hubbub of...
That doesn't sound right.
...arts, culture, and entertainment. And for the most part, in my youth, my teens and 20s, art house fare, foreign movies, independent films didn't get distribution here. There were a couple of the United Artists cinemas. I don't know if anybody can recall them having their own chain of theaters, but There were like 4 at least in town. 2 were like right across the street from each other, and they were both smaller cinemas, and they would occasionally, one or the other would show maybe an indie, low budget or art house movie. And one of them on Barstow Avenue, for all you Fresno folks out there, they showed Angel Heart. And that is a movie that I fell in love with. It brought me to Mickey Rourke. I almost said Mickey Rooney. Brought me to Mickey Rourke. And shortly after that movie, I was, keeping my eyes and ears peeled for Mickey Rourke news. And shortly after Angel Heart, he did Barfly. And that is a movie that kind of changed my life. It brought me to Bukowski, who became my favorite author. I mean, just an obsession for the most part for a good 15 years at least. And to those kind of movies, I learned about the director who I really had no idea about before, who had done all these interesting movies in the 60s and 70s, his documentary on Idi Amin, Barbet Schroeder, or probably Schrader actually. And that is sort of when I was losing my touch with horror and getting into cult, foreign art house movies. This all culminated with my trip to England, which I discussed on the Eraserhead episode and a couple of other ones, and seeing all these amazing 70s and 80s films there, and newer films like Drugstore Cowboy and Santa Sangre, Mystery Train, Jesus of Montreal. And so when I came back, I was really hungry for those movies. And for the most part, I'd have to go to Tower Records or Tower Video and or the Video Zone, which is a place that I ended up working at shortly thereafter. But in the meantime, the other United Artists across the street, basically kind of vertically across the street on Blackstone near Barstow, they started a program, I want to say in 1991. They started showing, it was either on Tuesday or Wednesday nights, they were showing art films, art house, independent, foreign movies. And Barton Fink was one of the first movies to play there. And I was excited about it because I had, I think, finally grown into Miller's Crossing. I loved Raising Arizona. I had seen Blood Simple by then. And I was also just intrigued by the fact that this character that John Turturro was playing looked like Henry Spencer from Eraserhead. So all this stuff started culminating. Oh, and also I was, kind of checking out the Cannes Film Festival stuff by then. Talked about that on Eraserhead, our aborted trip there the year before. And so this movie won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and was being described as Polanski-esque. For me, that was a huge draw. This was like the period of time. My Polanski passion was at its peak around this time. So it was, all this stuff kind of converged into perfect timing for Barton Fink with me. So me and some friends went and saw it on a Tuesday or Wednesday night, probably with maybe 5 other people. Actually, you know what? Those screenings were pretty well attended, to be honest with you. I think, like to think of ourselves as the only ones into these things, but Fresno isn't a hideously small town, so there were like-minded folk out there. And just absolutely loved this movie, saw the connections to Polanski, saw the connections to Eraserhead. I'm almost positive I went and saw it again, and that was unusual for me. I know I did that with Barfly. I may have even done it with Angel Heart as well. But these movies were going to play, I think they scheduled them for a week, and then the next week a new movie would show up. So, they might be, this started in 91-ish, so they might show movies from 1990, and then as it continued, especially with foreign films, the distribution can be delayed by a year or two. And so But Barton Fink was, like I say, my memory, and it just may be me making stuff up, says that this was the first one. This was their first go at this. It was my first go at this, obviously, if it was their first. Basically went and saw whatever they brought for the next couple of years. I think it kind of officially ended after maybe a year or so, but I know that this cinema continued to show movies like this up through like when Trainspotting came out, and I think that was 95 or 96. They showed the Three Colors trilogy, red, blue, and white, and I think I saw red and blue. I don't know if I saw white, and a whole bunch of other Reservoir Dogs played there in 92. And that was kind of probably their biggest box office success, I would imagine, since it just sort of changed the landscape of movies when it came out. But a whole bunch of movies. Didn't see Naked Lunch there, which was also a 91 film. Saw that in San Francisco. I don't know if it played and I didn't see it, but I dragged my sister and brother-in-law to that, made them take me out to this tiny little theater on the outskirts of San Francisco, and yeah, I think they probably have nightmares still from that. I loved it, of course, but yeah, I think my sister and brother-in-law had kind of gone off of the weirdo movie path by then. My sister had only really dipped her toes in it every once in a while, but they humored me and took me, and were probably thinking the whole time, what in the fuck are we watching? And to be honest, I'm probably not even going to get into the movie. This is kind of the episodes that I pictured in my head when I started this whole thing, is just talking about my experience with the films, and this opened up a whole new world for me. I remember reading, I always want to say it's Film Comment, and I don't know why I have that magazine in my head. I know I read through it a lot at Fresno State, but again, I looked through their, I think it was them, or maybe it was the commentary on the Laserdisc, but I remember the Coen Brothers talking about, they sort of referenced Miller's Crossing, and how a lot of the characters in that, when they meet up with each other, they would say, "What's the rumpus?" And so I think a lot of the same crew worked on Barton Fink, and instead of saying, "What's the rumpus?" they would say, "What's the goopus?" And that was in reference to the gunk that is supposed to be the wallpaper paste, and which also comes out of Madman Munt's ears because of his ear infection. So I guess it was called goop or goopus on set. So that's something that I never forgotten, and I don't know if I read it in Film Comment or if it was on the commentary track for Barton Fink, but that's probably about as deep into the movie as I'm going to get, other than those connections with Polanski and Eraserhead. The Eraserhead hair, it's not strictly Henry Spencer-esque. I know that the character of Barton Fink was sort of molded on Clifford Odets, if I'm not mistaken, kind of did the same thing that Barton does in the film, did the same thing that William Faulkner, a.k.a. W.P. Mayhew, did in the film, is, go to the Great Salt Lick of Hollywood during their, to make money during, after their playwright careers or their novel careers were kind of puttering out. But yeah, the Polanski connection is definitely there. They admitted as much. They were stated that, this is the inspiration was the Apartment trilogy by Polanski. You can see that throughout the film. I think one of the key moments for me with that is when Barton puts on his shoes while he's typing and realizes that they're too big. And there's this look of dread on his face that doesn't really coincide with that. Oh, I've got the wrong shoes, or something's wrong here. I mean, he looks like he's in a panic, in a moral panic. And, it's simply that he got Charlie Meadows' shoes instead of his own. And but it's just the perfect kind of encapsulation of what's going on in his mind at the time, with his writer's block and with his neighbor, with his overall stress, the life of the mind as it is. It has an amazing cast, amazing writing. The dialogue in this movie is some of the most quotable, next to Miller's Crossing, of any Coen Brothers movie. Tony Shalhoub is just amazing in this. They needed to do an offshoot movie of just him.
Whoa! How's Lipnick's ass smell this morning? Yeah? Yeah, all right, listen. Reason I'm calling. Got a writer here, Fink. Oh, screwy. Since I'm producing that Wallace Berry wrestling picture. What am I, the goddamn janitor around here? Yeah? Who'd you get that from? Well, tell Lipnick he can kiss my dimpled ass. No, all right. Shit. All right.
And everybody's just fantastic. If there was a weak point for me, it would probably be Judy Davis. And it's unfortunate because this is one of those male-centric movies. Every other character is male. She is, other than a couple of secretaries and I think Frances McDormand's voice at the beginning of as one of the characters in his play. Maybe it's more the writing of her character than her acting. And she was like the darling of the art house cinema at the time. I happened to look through her IMDb, and I think between 1990 and 1992, she was in 9 movies. Most of those were independent or art house films. She was in Naked Lunch, which I referenced earlier. She was in 2 different Woody Allen movies, I think, Alice and Crimes and Misdemeanors. And I mean, that continued on for years, but she was, very not overexposed, but just had a lot of exposure in those films in that period, in a very short period of time. It was really fun revisiting this movie. I'm kind of glad I hadn't watched it to death recently. But again, it was like Taxi Driver or like Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, where I found myself reciting nearly every line of dialogue in the film. And it's just that it was born out of their writer's block after Miller's Crossing, I think is just a testament to the greatness of their work. Now, I haven't liked every Coen Brothers movie, and there's actually a number that I haven't seen because the storylines just haven't interested me. Of the ones that I've seen and loved, Barton Fink is right there at the top. So, stay tuned, Patreon subscribers. Maybe another one will stop by. Because in the next day or so, I'm going to also be recording something on After Hours, which will be very similar in structure, mainly just talking about just personal thoughts about the movie, not so much a breakdown of the synopsis or the actors and all that, but watching Taxi Driver and thinking about horror and Scorsese. This urban horror movie kind of came back into my head, and I hadn't seen it in a long time, but watched it recently in prep for Taxi Driver, and so I'll throw out a few thoughts on that as well. Alrighty, thank you very much for listening. Again, suggestions are greatly appreciated for these Patreon episodes. I wish I had a couple more listeners so that I could maybe have a contest to pick a movie for me to do for the Patreon members. Until next time, this is Mark signing off. Don't forget to wake up heavy. From Weirding Way Media, Cambridge and Wishawn is a podcast about two guys' obsessions, passions, and hobbies. Those two guys are
Ronald Zarigian, host of the Skelevator YouTube channel,
and Mark Begley, host of Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror.
Each month we talk about the toys, comics, movies, books, TV shows, and other cultural phenomena that captured our imaginations and helped shape who we are today.
From Masters of the Universe to Saturday Night Live, Star Wars to Harry Houdini, The Muppets to the Elephant Man, Ronnie and Mark dive deep into the recesses of their minds to pull out treasured memories of things lost but never forgotten.
Join us on the first Tuesday of each month over at weirdingwaymedia.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Oh, wow.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, my weird dad's weird podcast about weird movies.
Hello and welcome to Wake Up Heavy Recollections of Horror Patreon episode numero 4. Number cuatro. That's it. That's the extent of my foreign language. And I didn't even do it correctly. Today I will be discussing Martin Scorsese's 1985 comedy, drama, thriller, After Hours.
Yes, get me the police, please, right away. Yes, officer, thank God. Okay. My name is Paul Hackett. I'm in Soho. I don't know the exact location, and I'm being persecuted by a vigilante mob. I'm sure you're aware of their actions. Right. Now, I have every reason in the world to believe my life is in serious, serious danger. Now, evidently, there's a series of robberies that are being conducted in this neighborhood.
Get some sleep, buddy.
And hello? 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 Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
Griffin Dunne stars as Paul Hackett, a word processor, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure what his job is, who takes a wild adventure in the late night Soho area of New York City.
I have had a terrible, terrible night. You understand?
I'm just trying to entertain you.
I don't want any entertainment. I'm sorry I did that.
Now, I watched this because of the Taxi Driver episode. I wasn't going to watch all of Scorsese's films, obviously, but there was a few, not blind spots necessarily, but movies that I didn't watch a ton back in my Scorsese days. And this was one of them, and King of Comedy was the other. And these are the weird kind of outlier Scorsese films from the early 80s. Basically, he was trying to get Last Temptation of Christ off the ground and had been doing so for years. He had been given the book by Barbara Hershey on the set of, or while they were shooting Boxcar Bertha, and that movie came out in, I think, 1970, 72 maybe. So originally Scorsese had wanted De Niro to play Christ in Last Temptation of Christ. I don't know if Schrader originally wrote the first draft for him for the script, or if that came later as a rewrite. Schrader is credited with the screenplay for Last Temptation, but of course it just kept not getting made. And by the time it did get made in, I want to say 88 or 89, this Scorsese had gotten too old.
That doesn't sound right.
To play Christ, and I think he wasn't really interested anymore. But it ended up with Willem Dafoe as the lead, which I'm kind of curious if that was a Schrader suggestion since he had worked with him on Light Sleeper. I don't know. So these movies, King of Comedy in 82 and After Hours in 85, came while Scorsese was looking for stuff to do while he was trying to get Last Temptation of Christ made. And King of Comedy had been a script that had been given to De Niro back in the Taxi Driver days, and he had really wanted to do that, and this was sort of the deal. If he was going to be Christ in Last Temptation of Christ, he wanted Scorsese to make the King of Comedy. And then the After Hours script, I think, just kind of came to him through Griffin Dunne's production company somehow. Dunn had purchased the rights to the story, and it made its way to Scorsese, and he took it as a job. He's got to work, while doing all this waiting. And apparently the story, most of the first half hour of the story was kind of ripped almost word for word from a radio play, I guess I could call it, from Joe Frank back in 1982 on NPR. It was a monologue, I guess. It was a story, a radio play. And so I listened to that yesterday, and it's got pretty much all the beats of that first part where Griffin Dunn's character Paul meets Rosanna Arquette's character Marcy in the diner. They talk about the bagels with cream cheese, paperweights, the trip to her apartment, her story about her rape, and I think maybe his story about being in the burn ward. I'm not really, now I'm forgetting. But it's an obvious rip on this, and of course this guy Joe Frank sued and got a pretty hefty settlement out of court. It gets brought up every once in a while with After Hours, and I have a feeling that Scorsese and Griffin Dunn and most of the other people on the production had no idea, but obviously the screenwriter did. That kind of stuff sort of bothers me, and I don't understand the idea behind it. I mean, if you're writing a script and you're hoping to make it a movie and you're basing it pretty solidly on a previous work, it's going to get out in the public, and more likely than not, this person's going to see it or hear about it from someone who has seen it or heard his radio play, and it's going to get back to this guy. And it just makes me think of the whole deal with Reservoir Dogs and Quentin Tarantino taking large chunks of that from Ring of Fire and kind of being elusive about it at the beginning, and then thanks to Mike White from the Projection Booth podcast, that his video years ago basically showing the side-by-side comparison of the two movies kind of blew that all up in Tarantino's face. And, people steal. I mean, Scorsese steals shots from all the movies that he's loved as a kid, and it's a totally different kind of scenario. This movie isn't as... There's a lot of moving camera. There's the Scorsese flares throughout. It's just not as visceral and kind of gut-punching as his 70s movies. And I'm trying to think if I even knew... I'm trying to place when I saw this. If I saw it actually before Taxi Driver, just because it was a comedy and it would have been out on video in, the mid to late 80s, probably 86, since most of these things take a year to come out, or took a year, I should say. So I could have very well seen it without really any knowledge of Scorsese's other work at that point. Or it could have been, like I discussed on the Taxi Driver episode, where you see one of his kind of benchmark movies and then you go and discover these other ones that don't get talked about as much. And I have seen recently on Twitter and elsewhere where people put this at the top of their Scorsese list, and you know what? That's fine. Everybody's opinions are different. Everybody gets different things out of movies. I don't put it very high on my Scorsese list. I've watched it twice in the last month or two here. It's okay. It does have some of those flourishes. It's well acted. It does kind of pick at my anxieties though. And this anxiety is more, again, it's about kind of leaving situations that are obviously strange and uncomfortable. And I would say Paul Hackett does try to leave most of these situations, but it's just one thing after another. And I mean, that's the horror of this story and why I'm even doing it at all, because it's one of those. Oh, what's it called? It's kind of like a fish out of water story in a way, because he's out late at night in an area that he probably doesn't normally go to. encountering people that he would not normally associate with. And it's unsettling, and he starts to get paranoid. Everything is weird, and all the people are weird, and that's his yuppie nightmare. He thought he was going down to Soho to get an easy lay with this girl who seems a little bit off when they meet at the diner, and it does not turn out that way. The other thing that kind of bugs me about the movie is that Paul is an asshole, and I don't know what it is with Scorsese and these flawed characters. And I mean, having some goody two-shoes guy for watching a movie for 2 hours of that is not necessarily interesting, but I'd rather have a flawed character like Travis Bickle than just a white male entitled asshole like Paul is. And this is kind of apparent from the first scene where he is still at work and he's kind of training this new employee played by Bronson Pinchot. Bronson starts talking about his magazine that he's going to create, this poetry and art magazine, and he's obviously very into it, and it becomes apparent to him and to the audience very quickly that Paul couldn't give a shit. And that's the first glimpse of his self-absorption. And all throughout this movie, when he meets a new person, that person really spills their guts to him, and he just cannot muster any sympathy or any concern for these people. Marcy, who is played by Rosanna Arquette, when they meet, and then when they meet again at her apartment or where she's staying, she unloads all kinds of personal crap on him, including the rape story and all this other stuff. And it's like he has to, I don't want to say pretend, but he's got to muster up that concern. And I guess it is pretending. He really doesn't care. He wants to sleep with her. Things just get weird and weirder, and she leaves and comes back, and her roommate Kiki is there, played by Linda Fiorentino, I think in one of her first roles. He is sexually attracted to her and thinks, well, if I'm not going to have sex with Marcy, maybe I'll have sex with this girl. This just goes on and on. Every person he meets just unloads on him, and he cannot care, does not care. So there's this whole thing in the movie regarding burns. Paul tells a story to Kiki after Marcy has gone off to get some medication or something about being in the burn ward as a kid. He was there, now I can't remember what for, to have his tonsils removed or something. They had to put him in the burn ward because there was no room for him anywhere else. And they blindfolded him and told him not to, take off the blindfold, and he sees something horrible. It's alluded to that Marcy has severe burns all over her body, which we later discover is not true. And then we've got matches, we've got lighters. There's a song toward the end of the movie that plays. The first part of the song is kind of a narration by the singer regarding her house burning down as a child. And so this whole time I'm watching it the other day for the show, I'm like, what is this all about? Nobody gets set on fire in this. He doesn't ever get burned. What's the subtext here? And I could not figure it out. And so if you have any ideas about that, let me know. But then there's another thing that I read, which I probably never would have thought of on my own, but at one point Marcy, and I don't know which, because they meet at the diner, he goes back to her place, she leaves, comes back, he leaves, comes back, and they go somewhere else at some point, to another diner, to get coffee, and she brings up the Wizard of Oz in regard to one of her old flames, and how when he was achieving climax, he would scream out something like, "Surrender, Dorothy," and didn't even realize he was doing it. And so apparently there are parallels between the Wizard of Oz and the story. And so I was sitting there thinking, well, who's who? Okay, so he's Dorothy. Who do these other people represent? And I'm really my only reference is the movie. I haven't read any of the books. If I did as a child, I do not remember them. And I thought, well, okay, so Marcy, that's the first person he meets. Is she supposed to be the Tin Man with no heart? Does that fit? I guess it kind of does. The Terry Garr character that he meets later on could definitely be the Scarecrow with no brain. And the Cowardly Lion, I don't know. Somebody else in there. But the whole point was basically that, at the end of the movie, spoilers, he ends up magically right in front of his office again. Through various circuitous circumstances, he ends up back in front of his office after this long night out. I think he leaves his house to meet Marcy at 11:32. I remember noting that on the clock. And so from then until, 8 the next morning, 7, 8 the next morning, he is out in Soho trying to get back home. Yeah, it's kind of a comedy of errors, which I discovered a while ago that I really hate, and it brings on anxiety. It's not so much that in this movie, but it has those kind of beats where everything that could go wrong does, and everything's out of the control of the protagonist. His money blows out the window when he's taking the cab to see Marcy, and that comes into play over and over again. Every person he meets kind of blocks his goal of getting laid, and then at one point getting back home. He cannot get back home. The fare goes up for the subway at midnight that night, and he encounters our good friend from Taxi Driver who got his fingers blown off in the hallway at the beginning of the Kill Crazy Rampage. And we have another Taxi Driver alum, and I can't figure out, there's two guys in the diner. One of them later on is our buddy from and I don't think he even talked about this scene in the Taxi Driver episode, but he owns the bodega where Travis kills a would-be robber, and it's the same character actor in After Hours at the diner. But earlier in the diner, Dick Miller is there. I guess maybe he's just the waiter and the other guy is the owner. So Dick Miller has a very brief but lovable performance in this movie. We've got Cheech and Chong for some reason, and I still don't really understand. They're used sparingly and aren't given much chance to perform their comedy routine. I mentioned Terry Garr, of course, Rosanna Arquette. John Hurd plays a bartender who is Marcy's boyfriend, apparently. And this is where I start to get confused, because she talks about her husband who lives in Turkey, and she talks about other boyfriends, and I don't know that she mentions somebody who John Hurd could be. But it ties in later in the movie when Paul discovers Marcy's body at her apartment. She apparently committed suicide. John Hurd has Griffin Dunn's keys, through this whole convoluted scenario, and his girlfriend just committed suicide. It's got to be the same girl, blah, blah, blah. And it made me think about how I first saw the movie way back when I initially watched it. I think I left the movie with the idea that Marcy had set all of this up. Everything that happens to him that night is all her fucking with him. Like, she goes and picks up guys in diners, then puts them through hell. And I don't know, that might still be the case. That's a stretch, I think. But that was my initial impression of the movie. And it's just weird how, there are connections between a lot of the characters. And then we have this weird point in the movie towards the end when Paul is getting kind of helped by Catherine O'Hara in a great little part. He's been doing paper mache. There is this paper mache sculpture that ends up playing a major role in the movie. he goes to Marcy's, quote unquote, to buy one of these bagel and cream cheese paperweights that her friend Kiki makes. She's a sculptress and blah, blah, blah. So he's helping her paper mache this sculpture of a man screaming. And he has a little bit of that on his shoulder later on. It's very interesting as to what the story is in that little blurb.
A man was torn limb from limb by an irate mob last night in the fashionable Soho area of Manhattan. Police are having difficulty identifying the man because no form of ID was found on his shredded clothing.
Shredded?
And his entire face was pummeled completely beyond recognition.
Okay, forget that.
Wow!
Forget that.
And I guess it's just a strange coincidence. But then it made me think again, well, this is another victim of hers that suffered the same fate. And is this what's going to happen to Paul? At the end of the movie, he's finally nice to someone for the most part, but he gets trapped. And then, like I said, he ends up back at his office, goes back to his desk, and starts the whole day over again. And that kind of, again, made me, took me back to Taxi Driver with looping the movie. And then you could just connect this last roaming shot of the cubicles and stuff. Really great ending as the credits roll. This super long tracking shot with the camera just going all over this office as more and more employees start to show up. And then you could just loop it to the beginning and have it happen again. And that is, I think, the existential definition of hell. So that's pretty much it for After Hours. These two, Barton Fink and After Hours, are kind of stream of consciousness.
That doesn't sound right.
Stream of consciousness episodes. And so hopefully you'll get something out of them. I enjoyed talking about both. And I just had one little connection between the two movies and another movie I watched kind of in between these. The sound, let's see, the re-recording mixer and the sound engineer is a guy named Skip Livesey. And he has worked on, I don't know how many movies. He's just got tons of credits. But he did the sound engineering on After Hours. He did the sound engineering on Barton Fink. And he did the sound engineering. Now, let me look him up. Give me a second here. Loyal Patreon listeners. Listeners. Maybe there'll be two by the time this comes out. He has worked extensively with the Coen Brothers and Martin Scorsese. I turned off my fucking computer on accident, so let me pull this up. I'll keep talking while I'm doing this. Damn it, I just watched something else. And if I could remember what it was, I wouldn't have to go to IMDb to find it. But yeah, interesting. I keep seeing his name. Oh, Parents. Yes, I just rewatched Parents, and he did the sound engineering for that as well. So this guy is all over the place, and yeah, I think he still works with the Coen Brothers. I don't know if he's still working with Scorsese, but kind of interesting. He has got a lot of horror credits to his name from the 70s and 80s, and Coen Brothers and Scorsese and all kinds of other movies. So interesting little connection weaving in and out. And Parents will become something soon. I love that movie. Watched it, I think, last year for the first time in decades and forgot how much I really, really liked. Now, that's how you do black comedy. With very little comedy and a lot of blackness. But I think I need to finish it still. I haven't watched the whole thing. Alrighty. Thank you so much, Patreon listeners, for joining up and spending your hard-earned money on these things. What's up next? I don't know. Send me suggestions like I said in the Barton Fink episode. I will probably do an offshoot of whatever the next full episode for Wake Up Heavy is, which I still haven't decided on. And I have the movie Possession on its way to me from Amazon. And so that might be kind of a biggie Patreon episode. But we shall see. That might have to go on the regular list. But I don't know. I think I might throw something special up here. Okay. Thank you so much for listening. I don't think I signed off last time with this, but don't forget to wake up heavy.
Tonight is Mohawk night. If you had a mohawk, you could go in.